All right, so with that, why don't we get started? Because there are so many things for us to discuss this morning. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. And I think we're going to get a lot more people joining over the course of the next few minutes. I'm delighted to have as the next visitor in our series, Personal Histories and Conflict Resolution, the legendary Lucy Moore, who many of us, I know you bristle at that word, Lucy, but it's accurate. So I'm going to stick with it. Many of us have known Lucy for decades and the great work that she's done at the Western Network with her multi-party environmental public policy practice. And it's just a delight to have you here with us, Lucy, and we're very excited for this conversation. Thank you.
I am more excited. Thank you, Colin, so much.
Great, great. I hope everybody got a chance to read Lucy's wonderful chapter in the book, because that's what we're really going to use as the source of our conversation today, although it's going to go in a bunch of different directions. And if you do get a chance to open it up, it's on the invitation as well, so you can take a look, and because it's available full text. That was very nice that Nancy and Howard made that available. But Lucy, if you don't mind, I'd like to just dive in and get you to start talking about some of the stories. I know you and I have discussed a couple topics that we want to surface, and we've got some great practitioners on the call here to chew over those topics. But one of the things you talk about at the very beginning of your chapter is your experience in Chinle. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Chinle, yes, Arizona?
Yes, yeah. Chinle. Mm-hmm.
And I know you've written an award-winning memoir about your 7 years in Chinle. So there it is, into the canyon. Yeah, congratulations. And I'm ashamed to say I haven't read it yet, but I now, because of this chapter, I'm going to make a point of finding a copy and reading it. But one of the things that you said, and I want to get the language exactly right in the chapter, you said, you showed up in Chinle with idealism, energy, and compassion, ready to save everyone you encountered. And I think many of us came to this work from a similar place of idealism. But you said also those 7 years laid, quote, the foundation for your future work as a mediator and consultant in cross-cultural alliance building. So I just wanted you to tell a little bit of the story of Chinle, and maybe how it changed your worldview in the direction of the work that you do as a mediator.
Great, I'm happy to start there. It was such a significant part of my life, both personal and professional. So it's a kind of a great jumping off point for me. I was, 22 when I arrived in Chinle, which is in the center of the Navajo reservation, which is in the northeast corner of Arizona, very remote. I grew up in Seattle. I went east to college. This was a foreign country, and I was and it was the era, it was 1968. So it was the era of Peace Corps. I was it just felt as if it was time to make the world a better place. So I obviously I came with a whole lot of assumptions, like people need saving, these Navajo people are poor, they have a wonderful tradition and culture which needs preserving. Both of those things were true, but my role in that was not what I expected. So and I think what I really learned was, do not arrive with assumptions. And this goes for whether I'm walking into a mediation, whether I'm walking into a public meeting, whether I'm on vacation in Hawaii, whether I have just moved to Chinle, Arizona. Drop those assumptions, those stereotypes, those preconceptions of the landscape you're in, and take your time. I mean, that's so important. That what I learned, do not be this eager, urgent, young white person. I'm still eager and urgent. I'm not young, I'm still white. Just take your time and learn the landscape. And I mean, the geographic landscape, I mean the social economic landscape, cultural, personal, historical, especially what's happened on this land. How do these people feel about that history? How has it made them who they are today? I really needed to learn all of that before I could figure out what my role was. So when I arrived immediately, I was, for instance, I remember going to the local trading post and to do some shopping, and there was a Navajo woman pushing a grocery cart full of Wonder Bread and soda. And I just thought, oh no, where are the traditional Navajo foods? No, you cannot be eating this stuff. And it was 1968. It was just on the verge of organic and whole grain bread and all of this kind of stuff. And it took me time, but I realized that we had, mainstream society had gone through Wonder Bread and soda phase and finally figured out, it was some of us, that it was better to eat more wholesome foods, and that who was I to say, no, drop this phase of your evolution and do what I do because I figured out what's the right thing to do. That's just a very small example, and there were a lot of other examples that I talk a bit about in the book and a lot about in the memoir of, I taught Head Start, and my assumption there was, I was a teacher's aide actually, and the teachers were Navajo. And my assumption was that that I should be there to uphold Navajo culture, make these little children feel good about being Navajo. The Navajo teacher's idea was, yikes, we have grown up in a white world that is really hard to understand. We want our children to understand this white world from 4 years old on up. We've got a white woman in the classroom. She can teach us how to say those nursery rhymes just right. Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife and couldn't keep her. I mean, what on earth that has to do with anything, I don't know, but I found myself standing there explaining how to pronounce Peter, because it's what they desperately wanted me to do, and it was what I had to offer. My expertise, that was part of my expertise. So many stories, but I think I took that lesson of learn the landscape, learn the landscape before you walk into a situation, whether that's a different culture or not a different culture.
It's fascinating.
That was the main thing I took.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me how many people who do conflict resolution work have a formative experience like that early in their lives. I know I've read Peter's memoir about his Peace Corps service in India too. I think when you're 22, you think you have all these answers. I remember when I did Peace Corps, I thought I was going to go over there and teach everybody everything and take care of everybody. And the opposite happened. I was learning and being taken care of all the time. And I think it really takes you out of your frame. It removes a lot of the certainty. And it sounds like that was some of what, that those 7 years did for you. Exactly.
I think the other key thing I got was I learned how to be comfortable in my own skin. In a situation, in a place where I was like 1% of the population was white. Everybody else was Navajo. And I went through a very painful period of just wishing I were Navajo, and that if I worked hard enough, I could be Navajo, and maybe my hair would look more Navajo and my skin would look more Navajo, and eventually coming to a place of peace with who I was, what I had to offer, what I looked like. It was okay. They liked me anyway. And that is something really critical that I've taken with me. And
you do talk about that in the chapter. I know you also speak about credibility, the credibility your life experience has given you. And you say, in working with, quote, Native Americans and other communities for whom land, water, and cultural rights are so crucial. I would imagine Chinle had something to do with that, but all the work you've done since. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the importance of having that credibility with the communities you work with,
right.
and also kind of how you establish it at the beginning of a process, because I know sometimes that credibility with one group in a process can undermine some of your credibility with the other side. So maybe can you speak to that for a minute? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Absolutely, credibility has been crucial, and I think that experience in Navajo land that I brought with me then to New Mexico, the state next door, I think I have brought with me some kind of inner awareness about all the things I've just talked about, and I think that that showed. But really, credibility, I think, comes from caring and being interested in that other person. And that is manifested by, again, taking your time, listening, asking questions, sharing a bit about yourself, maybe not too much about yourself, being willing to make mistakes, cultural mistakes or other kinds of mistakes in that context, getting over it, laughing about it, and basically taking your time. So I try to build that into the work I'm doing and be able to spend time with that particular community or those individuals in advance of sitting down at a table where the sides are delineated and we're going to get to work.
Absolutely.
And I think the trick, for me, the trick has been to pay that same kind of caring attention, not just to the people of color side where I have an affinity and a credibility, but to whatever other sides there are. So I remember a job with the Army Corps of Engineers where I spent a lot of time with the colonel in Albuquerque. And he said he really wanted to wear his uniform for this particular meeting. I said, boy, it would sure mean a lot if you didn't have your uniform on. No, I really want my uniform. So, you know, working with him to understand what mattered to him and his people. So just that, I think that that's manifesting caring, and that's how we get credible with each other. That's
absolutely. How we well, I love you mentioned also about you were at an EPA training in Dallas, and somebody accused you of Santa Fe woo-woo, which I think is interesting because I definitely grew up in Dallas, and I know there's a huge meter. So it's interesting. Credibility, the challenge with credibility may be different not only for kind of each side in a negotiation, but each individual too, you know, and establishing that connection, establishing that rapport in a sense, so that they know that you're not just going to overlook their perspective because you've got preconceived notions about, you know, how everything should go. That's very interesting. Let me take a step back too. So the move from Chinle and then heading to New Mexico and then sort of beginning the work at Western Network. What was that? What was the transition? What took you from the Chinle experience into the Western Network? And I know you talk in the chapter about the inspirational example of Mo Udall. Maybe you could speak to that for a little bit. What was it about that work that made you think, maybe this is the kind of thing that I want to do with my career?
Yes. So yes, we moved from Chinle, and it was actually quite a painful decision. We were there almost 8 years and had become extremely attached to the land and to the people and the culture, but 2 small children, and my husband's profession as a lawyer, he just needed to get into a bigger pool. So we moved to Santa Fe, and I fell in with a wonderful colleague, John Folk-Williams, and we began to do research on water conflicts in the West. And it really was from a research point of view. And in that work, I came across the incredibly complex and volatile water conflict around Tucson, Arizona. And as I talked on the phone to the different parties, the mayor of Tucson, the head of the irrigation company that watered all the pecan trees, the mining executive, the tribal, there was a big tribal interest there. I began to hear the name Mo Udall. Well, Mo, you know, Mo did this, Mo is talking to us about that. And I thought, I mean, I certainly knew who Mo Udall was, but I didn't understand that role that he was playing, which was mediator. And the more I listened to people, I never talked to Mo himself, but I was just enchanted by the way people talked about him and how these people on opposite sides of this many-faceted dispute, how they could all be so comfortable and and trusting of this single person. How could that be? What had he done to have that come about? And there was a mystery about that. And I actually was quite attracted to the mystery of it. I thought, ooh, it could be sort of like being a spy or something in there, understanding all these different people and making things happen. So yes, I decided I wanted to be Mo when I grew up. At that point, I was I was almost 40. But
well, there's a lot of people that have decided they want to be Lucy Moore when they grow up too. So you know, you just got to pay it forward. And actually, and that takes me. There was another thing you talked about in your chapter that I loved, was this term entremetidos. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah,
which is like someone accused you of that in a process, and you describe it as, quote, those who get between, who butt in where they are not wanted. But at the same time, you talk in the chapter. I mean, I think all mediators, we share some fear that we're going to be perceived that way. You know, like we're just nosy nuisances who are kind of getting in between. But you also say that being invited to be in the middle is kind of an honor for you, and so I think there's a tension there, and it's interesting that you saw what Mo was doing and thought, you know, I kind of want to play that role too, you know. So tell me a little bit about that tension and sort of that how you've seen that over the course of your work.
Yeah, that was a very big lesson as when I worked with Western Network, which was a nonprofit, very small. It was me and John Fulk Williams and a handful of others.
Mm-hmm.
We did research. We then began to enter the mediation field with the support of foundations. Mm-hmm. And we had connections at Ford, Hewlett, all those ones that were putting money toward conflict resolution this by now it was the 80s and early 90s. And it was, for us, full of good intentions. I mean, relative newcomers, very much newcomers, only been in New Mexico a handful of years, and very well intentioned. I should have taken a little more, paid a little more attention to lessons from Chinle, but I was full of good intentions, and we all were, and so we began to write proposals and get grants for work in northern New Mexico, which is a very, very poor part of the country, and has a lot of Hispanic, many generations of Hispanic farmers and ranchers, and a lot of Indian tribes. So it's a very poor and land-based part of the state. And we were offering ourselves and basically inventing projects that we thought were needed for tribes to talk to the state water authorities about tribal water rights, come to some agreements, that kind of thing. What our big mistake and why we were labeled entremetidos and raising money on the backs of poor people and carpetbaggers and really ugly stuff was said about us, not so much by the tribal folks, but by the Hispanic folks. And the reason was that we never really asked them, is this a good idea? Would you like to have a meeting of all of you Hispanic ranchers, get and the federal EPA and talk about water quality contamination in the ditches or something like that? We never asked. It was our own arrogance that turned us into entremetidos. So the distinction that I make about being entremetido and being a mediator is that the mediator's invited in at and is accepted and supported to some degree by all of the parties at the table. The mediator does not invent the project. We then, as a result of this and some really painful and profound conversations with local people who were kind enough to educate us about what I'm just talking about, we morphed into a for-profit fee-for-services organization. We felt that was cleaner. If people needed something, and they should be willing to pay us to help them do it if we were the right ones to do it. And it worked out really well. And we also managed to pull some of those big foundations together, Ford, Hewlett, and others, to give grants directly to those people in northern New Mexico for projects that they themselves identified as something they wanted to do. So that was our way of building trust and responding to what we heard that they needed. We were using our power, those connections, to respond to those needs. Seems pretty simple now, but back then it was kind of a big deal and a big wake-up call for us, and one I've never forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Larry Susskind gave a keynote at one of the ACR EPP section conferences a few years ago. I don't know, it was quite a few years ago. And he said, what are some of the lessons learned from, the work that we've done in the multi-party side of the field, the public policy, environmental side of the field? And one of the things that he said was, we had too much faith in, the public institutions, the government side, the foundations. We thought if we did our work there, it would help us maintain our neutrality. But in fact, I mean, this is interesting. This is what you discovered at Western Network. You started out in that world, but you've always got to go talk to the foundations and, get more money and get another grant. But I think it's very interesting the transition you made to a for-profit entity and how you feel like that actually improved your credibility with the stakeholders you were working with. I think that it really tracks some of what Larry said in that keynote. I mean, I think that's a really important takeaway from the lessons learned at Western.
Yeah, really interesting. Really interesting. Yeah.
I mean, another thing that I think Western Network really is known for is your pioneering of the use of really diverse facilitation teams. And you brought in a lot of people to Western Network that didn't really know much about the field. I mean, I think about Rosemary Romero, who you brought in and essentially trained her as a mediator. And then, I mean, she went on to the absolute highest highs in the field. I think she was president of Spider for a time. I mean, it's, so you've brought a lot of people into the field. And I think that that's something that we in the field writ large, I think a lot of people wring their hands and say, wow, we've not done a very good job at this, but you have. And sort of what lessons did you learn at Western in terms of bringing in some of those people who weren't, they might not have self-identified as mediators or conflict resolution practitioners, but you identified something in them and then brought them in and made them part of the organization, and it really enriched the work that you did. So can you share some of the lessons learned from the successes you had?
Love to. It's something I care a lot about. I cared about it then, and I care about it more now, if that's possible. And that was one of the things we learned from our conversations with the folks in northern New Mexico, was that our organization looked incredibly white because it was incredibly white, and that was a problem. You should look more like where you are. And so Rosemary came to us, Rosemary Romero, who's a native northern New Mexican, and she started as our secretary. She was well skilled at that and got interested in the work, and we just moved her on up until she became a full-fledged mediator, facilitator, and yes, as you say, became actually the president of Spider and a real leader in the field. We also got some foundation funding to hire two interns for 2 years who were native New Mexicans. One was a tribal person and one a Hispanic person. And the problem was that when the 2 years was up, we couldn't let them go. We fell in love with them. They were part of us. It just seemed so artificial to say, oh, well, you're in a certain category, which is called intern, so goodbye. I mean, and they were in no way ready to go hang their shingles out at all. It took, a lot more than 2 years to begin to build skills and confidence and have them even decide whether or not they wanted this kind of career for themselves. So we hung on to them, and we had, and yet they were not bringing in work for us. They were definitely enriching the work we were doing in all kinds of ways, but they were not bringing in the fee for service that we needed. And so eventually that was one of the problems, and Western Network folded as we were still a nonprofit, but fee for service. And we kind of imploded after 14 years, which is a pretty good run,
Yeah, that is
But
a good run, but
yeah,
another lesson learned. I mean, I think that's one of the things is it's hard to find the business model for services like this sometimes. So yeah,
exactly.
and actually that takes me to another point. I was actually was wondering if I could get you to read something
Sure.
from your chapter on page 109 in the second paragraph on the page, that sentence that starts too often. And because you talk about sustainability, and this is something that we need to start to build into the work that we do. You say, I'd like to see a core tenet in our practice relating to sustainability. So I was wondering if you could read that next sentence there, starting too often.
Sure. Too often, we mediators put all the energy up front and have nothing to offer in the way of implementation, sustainability, monitoring, follow through, enforcement, and revisiting the mediated agreement.
And maybe read the next sentence too.
We are focused on the resolution of the conflict, and too often, once those signatures are on the dotted line, we breathe a sigh of relief, shake hands all around, wish the parties luck, and ride off into the sunset.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about this idea of sustainability. And I'm connecting it to your experience at Western Network too. You're doing great work, you had great people there, but it's that question of, do we give up too early in a sense? And we don't really have a model for sustained engagement with these conflicts after we get the handshake. Would you speak to that? Because I thought
Yes,
that
of
was one of the
course.
best things in your
Yeah,
chapter.
yeah, thank you. And I think it's something we don't talk about enough. And I think, I mean, I would like to answer it both with respect to the sustainability of the agreements we reach in the work we're doing, but also the sustainability of our profession
Right.
in terms of diversifying and, how to, like at Western Network, we just couldn't keep it up. But to speak to the professional side of it, what it is that we're doing, I just have had so many experiences where I was sorry to say goodbye. I didn't want to ride off into the sunset. I wanted to stick around. I wanted to see how everybody did. I wanted to kind of keep being a cheerleader. And I wanted to, I had a sneaking suspicion, whoa, this might, when this office changes, when a new person becomes the tribal chairman or becomes the head of the environment department, I don't know if this is going to stick. And yet there was no, there was no role, there was no official role, and there was no payment to stay involved. There was no way to consider that part of the work, and it's never part of the work when I'm answering RFPs, and it's never, it ends with the final report and the resolution of the conflict. And I just think that's a real disservice. I had one case that I mentioned in the book, the resolution of water rights conflict between the state of New Mexico and the Navajo Nation. And it was very difficult to pull off, and it took several years. And we got an agreement signed by the governor of New Mexico, the president of the Navajo Nation, and the Department of Justice, and all who needed to be involved. And yet there was a very disgruntled white farming community that was right there, that was competing for those water rights, had not been included. There is a mistake right there, but had not been included in the deliberations. I'd insisted on one public meeting with them before the agreement was signed to talk to them about it, help educate them about what was in it. But that was not enough, and they kind of simmered for a few years, and then got lawsuits together and managed to slow up the implementation of the project that was the key to the water rights settlement. They managed to slow that up and put it in doubt. It is happening now. But it could have, if my role had been expanded, or they'd brought somebody in to keep kind of manage that support for the process, it would have gone a lot more smoothly. So
Well, it's interesting. Zena put something in the chat, sort of talking about the differences with family mediation and multi-party. And it's interesting because I was part of a facilitation team for a dispute in Cape Cod about windmills they were trying to build in Nantucket Sound. And we actually reached an agreement, and we worked really hard with our stakeholders to reach an agreement. But one of the key participating organizations, as you mentioned, they had a leadership change. And the new people that came in were not at the table with us. And they inherited this agreement, but they didn't have buy-in to it. And it kind of came unstuck a little bit. And then they ended up escalating it to, other stakeholders. They took it to the federal level, and then everything we did kind of came undone. So I think it is an interesting aspect of the multi-party side, because we do have to make sure that all of the key decision makers are at the table, and then those organizations can go through their own change, which may weaken their commitment to an agreement. Now, presumably in a family case, you don't have, it's not like you bring in a new executive director and then, the family, like they have no buy-in, they don't remember what happened. But Zena, it's interesting, in some of the family work that I've done, I do think that there is an element of family mediators, and I'm not saying you, but there's an element of, okay, well, now we have the parenting plan, and now it's filed with the court. Okay, shake hands, good luck, And then it's interesting, now that I'm working with companies like Co-Parenter and Our Family Wizard, they focus on the post-agreement phase. And so much of it is trying to keep the agreement on track, because, things change. Maybe the kids get older, and, the kind of child support levels that were agreed upon aren't appropriate anymore, because now they're going to summer camp, and, they're taking music lessons, and, the healthcare changes, or they go to a new school. So it actually amazes me how difficult it is to re-engage a little bit and make adjustments to keep an agreement working, as opposed to, and it seems like most of our energy is in getting the original agreement, and then we kind of have that handshake moment. So Zena, I was just wondering, maybe I'm stretching it a little bit much to make a parallel between a multi-party environmental water rights dispute and a family dispute, but maybe you could speak to that.
Although, you talk about elder mediation or probate mediation,
Right.
it's definitely multi-party.
That's true.
But the family members, they may remarry, they may bring other people in, but the core of them is still the same. But it does make a difference who they marry the second time. So that may, I realize I also do employment disputes. And so that's another one where there may be one agreement, and I do actually, not mostly the disputes, but the continuing facilitation. But yeah, if somebody new comes in, changes everything. Yep.
Yeah, and I guess I want to bring it back to what Lucy said. Is she said she'd like to see in print something about a commitment to grow our field, well, by essentially about sustainability. And I think that this is something maybe that we need to think about a little bit more in our practice. Is it's not just about getting the agreement and the handshake. I think and then we sort of say, okay, on to the next case. And that's what I hear you talking about, Lucy. And I don't think it's only in the multi-party side. I think that this is something, again, we define our role as interveners assisting this particular conversation. When the conversation's over, we move on to the next thing. But yeah. So Lucy, I don't know if you'd speak to that.
I just wanted to. I'm just thinking about sustainability and another kind of follow-on to reaching that agreement is to check with the parties to try to learn something about the process they've gone through. And just twice in my career have I been able to bring parties back together. Once it was after about 5 years, and it was really interesting to hear, and the only purpose of bringing them back was to just hear their reflections on, remember when we all got together and did that? What did it work? What happened? What was it like? Yeah. Well, how did you feel when you first sat down at the table with so-and-so? And to have some time to look back was really powerful for people. And, there was a kind of affection, a kind of a, oh yeah, we went through some tough stuff together, that kind of feel among them. But there was also, didn't appreciate it when you sued me the year after. And, but to have, it showed me the value of letting some time pass and then checking in to just simply see not so much where the dispute is, but looking back on the experience itself, I think it was really good for those parties to do. It kind of rekindled and reaffirmed for them that they had done something tough and together, and it had worked. And I think it also, for me as mediator, it definitely was incredibly insightful and helpful for me in doing my work. So that kind of post-evaluation is.
It's interesting too, in the work that I'm doing in the courts, one of the criticisms that is often levied against dispute resolution is it durable? You know, it's not, it's interesting they don't use the word sustainable. They say, are the agreements achieved durable, or as durable as what we achieve in the courts? So now I think the Pew Charitable Trust has created 3 academic teams to do some empirical longitudinal research to look at these dispute resolution outcomes to see how do they compare in terms of durability compared to outcomes delivered by the courts. Because I realized, looking at the systems I've built over the years, I don't have that data. I haven't, like you, I haven't had those experiences where you go back 5 years later with your parties and say, hey, what happened? You know, I really do feel like I've delivered resolutions. People say, okay, thanks. And then I'm off to the next case. So it's an interesting thing to think about. Rick put something in the chat. He said, were there no provisions in the agreements for parties to use mediation? Should there be a breakdown on the terms of the agreement? Is that something that you, I mean, I know that transformative practitioners often think not only about this case, but how can we build tools that if another issue arises, you know, we've got some of the tools already at our disposal to work out future problems that haven't even arisen yet. Is that something that you would build into the agreements that you put together?
I guess I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
Put in tools about how to handle the future.
Like if right, we've resolved this issue, but if other issues emerge, here are some mechanisms we can use in the future to try and resolve them.
That's a great idea. I love that. I love that. And I just wanted to think about durability versus sustainability. Durability sounds like, you know, is everybody still doing what they promised they would do?
Right.
You know, has it been overturned in court? What has happened to it? But it doesn't, but sustainability to me feels more about the people. Are they still, do they still believe in what they did? Are they still willing to stand up for it? Are they still willing to kind of get, you know, in the mud about it and try to hang on to it? Do they believe in what they did? And do they believe in the relationships that they formed in the doing of it? And is that what is being sustained? So
I agree with you there. I think there's nothing that says once an agreement is achieved, it has to be written on a stone tablet and never changed. It's not a bad thing if an agreement evolves over time as conditions evolve. But the question that I would have looking back at a resolution process is, did it create the relationships that allowed for that flexibility moving forward so that things didn't break down again? And I think Zena posted something. It said early research in family mediation shows that early mediation leads to more durable agreements. It's interesting that the courts talk about durability and we're talking about sustainability. I like sustainability a lot better because it doesn't imply inflexibility. You know, it does do the bonds of trust that we were able to construct. Did they hold even as conditions changed over the ensuing years? So that, you know, that would be interesting. Yeah, maybe we need to do that with more of our disputes. Go back and see 5-10 years later, you know, what happened.
Yeah, I recommend it. Yeah,
that's great. Now I want to open it up for everybody else to ask some questions because I'm feeling a little selfish here because I'm commandeering all your time. But I wanted you to read one other passage that I thought was really interesting, which is on page 107. The first 3 sentences of your last paragraph there that start, "For me to treat parties equally." Do you see that there? Can you read those 3 sentences?
Sure. For me to treat parties equally is often not enough. Some at the table may not have the capacity to participate effectively because of language or cultural barriers, inadequate financial resources, or lack of technical understanding of the issues. To treat them equally with corporate lawyers, environmental activists, and agency experts feels to me like abuse.
Yeah, actually read the next sentence too, because I think it's good.
we owe it to all our parties to be sure they have what they need to be fully engaged with a strong, clear voice.
So that's really interesting, because I do feel like in our society, we have a lot of talk about equality. It's like, well, if everyone's treated equally, then that's the best that we can hope for. And it is interesting because we have a lot of power asymmetries in our society. And if we say, well, everybody's going to be treated equally in the process, are we just, we're continuing those imbalances by refusing to address them, by just saying, well, everybody's going to be equal in this process. And I think it's interesting. It makes me think of my good friend John Ford, who talks about, I talk about the golden rule, treat other people the way you want to be treated. And he says, no, I like the platinum rule, which is treat people the way that they want to be treated, not the way that you want to be treated. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that. I think that's a really interesting idea, going beyond equality.
Yeah, and I struggle with it for the reasons that I think for reasons we all understand, that it comes close to the question of, are we really unbiased here? Are we really maintaining our neutrality? Isn't that all we're supposed to do, is just treat everybody equally? And if we have the right people at the table, they will be the ones to work it out, and it will be a good agreement. They all agreed.
Right.
And what I came to realize is what I just read, that there's not equal power at the table, and you cannot treat people who are not equally powerful equally. And so what I have done is try to build up the power on the less powerful side. And I think it's risky. I think it's, it's like, whoa, Lucy, you're favoring these people. I tell myself, I tell others, I'm upfront about it, that, we're going to spend 3 weeks on this particular topic because the community members at the table need some tutoring in groundwater quality chemistry, because it's a very difficult topic and they must understand it. And they are going to be able to be good negotiators at the table if they are understanding. Nobody wants to negotiate with someone who doesn't understand what's happening.
Right.
Or I will be upfront about how money is distributed. We are paying for daycare so that Mrs. Martinez can be with us today. She had to, she needs to be able to feel comfortable leaving her children home, and they are in good care. And we're glad that you're with us, Mrs. Martinez. So,
right.
So I'm very upfront about it. And I have not had any, I have not had the lawyer from EPA say, well, I could use babysitter money too.
Right.
So, there's an acceptance and an understanding that this is a fair thing to be doing. And I think it certainly builds credibility. It's part of what I started out saying about understand who you're working with, somebody, understand who they are, what landscape they're coming from,
right.
what they need. If I understand all that, then it's very clear that this person needs this kind of help in order to be a good participant at the table.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I wrote my collegiate thesis on conflict resolution, and I had the zeal of the converted. Anything that was in getting the yes, well, that's the truth, and it's never going to change. But my thesis advisor was more of a skeptic, and he made me read all the critics of dispute resolution to kind of temper my enthusiasm. So I read a lot of Laura Nader and Richard Delgado and Sylvie and Mary. And one of the things that those people would say over and over again is the conflict resolution people they don't adequately account for power. Power differentials are a reality in cases. And when you say, well, it's just going to be equal, we're going to treat everybody fairly. I mean, at the time, there was a lot of talk about neutrality. And then there was Sarah Cobb, obviously, there was a great article talking about, well, should we really call ourselves neutral? Bernie talked about that too, and beyond neutrality. So then we started to talk about, well, maybe we're not neutral, but maybe we can be impartial. But more recently, what I hear is people don't talk about impartiality, they talk about omnipartiality. And I think that that's a really interesting way to think about it, because then it's not about level playing field. It's about exactly what you say. It's like, how can we create an environment where everybody has the tools that they need to participate fully in the process? And that doesn't mean that we treat everybody equally. it may mean that one, like you said, one participants need some money to help with childcare and somebody else doesn't. But that's the only way we're going to get to the point where everyone's sitting at the table and able to participate in the way that they need to participate. So I just think it's a fascinating idea, and it's all part of that same issue around neutrality, impartiality, impartiality.
Right. If I could just add, I've taken it, the kind of, for me, the natural next step, which is to make everybody comfortable at the table. And for some tribal people, they want to start a meeting with a prayer in their native language.
Right.
And I encourage that, invite that, and I'm grateful for that. That, when I first started when I realized that was important to them, I was nervous. I thought, the Baptists are going to be saying, we want to pray to.
Right. Sure.
That has never happened in all my year. I've done hundreds of meetings with tribal people and opening it with a prayer. And it is so interesting to me how that was something I did in order to level the power imbalance by increasing the comfort, by having the tribal people bring something of their own power to the table. Sure. That they wouldn't otherwise be able to bring to, they don't, usually they're going to the white table and they've got to act white and do white stuff. Right. So they're bringing some of their own power. It's a gift. It is a gift to everybody at the table. Right. And everybody at the table realizes that. And those prayers, which are most often in native languages, and then they will translate for themselves. This is what I said. We're all here together. We all belong to the earth. We all are hoping for good health in the future, and that kind of thing. It's on behalf of the whole table. So and everybody understands that, appreciates it, and accepts it as a gift. So it's just so interesting. I've never had anybody, a white participant with absolutely no connection to Indian country. I've never had somebody like that just take advantage of the moment and look at a cell phone, I don't know why, I don't know what they're saying. They're saying something in a foreign language. I'm just going to catch up on my emails. Never. Yeah. People feel the power of it and appreciate it and take it in, and it changes to some degree. It changes what follows. It changes the whole day we spend together. So that to me is another, kind of a more subtle part of balancing that power. It's actually allowing the unpowerful side, the less powerful side, to bring some of their power to the table and show it and kind of take ownership of the process, not just scramble so that I can fit into the process so I understand a little bit better, but arrive as themselves with their own power and identity and gifts to share.
Yeah, I do feel like some new practitioners can sometimes hide behind the mask of neutrality and say, well, I'm tabula rasa, it's a level playing field. But it takes some courage, and I think it took time for you to make decisions to say, you know what, we're gonna do this because this is the right thing for the process. And it's interesting that that's the reactions that it's gotten when you've taken those initiatives. So I want to go to Lou's question. I have more things that I want to ask you, but I'm feeling a little selfish here. But Lou said, in your chapter, you refer to those occasional participants where you encounter a take no prisoners, give no quarter, uncooperative type person. And Lou's curious, what did you try and what worked to build more willingness to collaborate?
I think I was in the chapter thinking of righteous. I think I was saying my least favorite people are righteous people.
They've got the truth. They know already the answer. Yeah.
And I've had big failures with them. I've had them being there not in good faith and preventing consensus at the end of a process. And a process with 21 participants, 20 agree and 1 doesn't. I could talk at some length about that particular case. and what I think did come out of it that was worth it. But that is, so but the question was, what do I do when I realize they are among us? I breathe deeply and try to control my judgmentalism, which you're seeing in full force here. So I get myself together. I talk offline, obviously, with that person. You know, are you here in good faith? Can you see some room here that, to negotiate? Do you see a little scrap of common ground when so-and-so said this? Is that not an opening for you to whatever? If that fails, which it may, if the person is dug in and is not going to offer consensus because their position is not, because compromise is an evil word and they will not give an inch. I have gone to the boss, if it was an environmental organization, as it actually was in both cases. I've gone to the leadership and said, this person is not helpful in our process. Might we have somebody that's more willing to participate in good faith? And in the one case that I did that, the person said, no, she is exactly who I want to have at your table. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
It just, obviously you can try to point out why it would be good to, why it would benefit that person to be a better participant, to show some, you're going to be more popular. People are going to listen to your points better if they think there's some point in negotiating with you. But that can work. But there are certain hardline cases where it does not, and you just wish they weren't there.
Yeah. Rick actually posted another great comment. He said, I found the use of an expert, bringing in somebody who can work with one or both the parties to create an understanding of financial or technical issues, can create more trust in the information being advanced and discussed. Have you leveraged a dynamic like that in your processes?
Yes. I think that's a great point. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, transparency about this person coming in so that all sides understand that they're there and why they're there. I think there still may be the need for the kind of tutorial for those participants that need to be brought up to speed. But certainly bringing in an expert everybody can agree is worth listening to is really important. Really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to open it up for our participants. If they have any more questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. One of the things we had talked about, Lucy, was sort of the dynamics of society kind of heading in a different direction than our work, and I talked about how I'm confronted with people now who feel that, actually sitting down at the table and listening to the other side is a sign of weakness. And, they want to take more of an activist sort of advocacy approach, and they don't want to engage in negotiations and conversations. Instead, they kind of want to make demands. And I understand why in this moment, people feel the urgency because, we've had these conversations for years. I feel like they haven't achieved anything. So I know that that's something that you've thought about as well. Maybe you could speak to that, in terms of the relevance of our work at this time in our country.
Yeah, big topic, and certainly should be something we're looking at seriously, I think, all of us. I just want to tell a brief story of when I first got the news about this, which was actually at least 25 years ago or more. There was a big conflict in Albuquerque, nearby where I am in Santa Fe. It had to do with the Air Force Base leaking and contaminating the groundwater under a poor Hispanic neighborhood in Albuquerque. And there was a process underway that I read about in the paper. It had EPA, it had the State Environment Department, it had the Air Force, and it had the community all at the table together. No facilitator, no mediator. And the report in the paper said that the community person, Miguel Guerrero, had stood up at the last meeting, thrown over his chair and walked out and said they were not coming back, that the community was not coming back. And I was like a beginning mediator. And I was like, oh, they just need me. I know someone at the Air Force. I know the person at the Environment Department. I know a lot of people at EPA. Oh, and I know Miguel Guerrero. So I called Miguel up and I said, Miguel, I read that you left the meeting. I'm so sorry. He said, why are you sorry? I said, well, you know, the process now, I guess it's not gonna happen and I don't know what you're gonna do. You know, the groundwater is just getting more contaminated as time goes by. And if you walked away from the table, how are you going to find a result? I said, I could, you know, if I were mediating, I could like make sure that everybody listened and everybody was respectful to each other and you could be heard. And, you know, it would be a nice process. He says, Lucy, we do not want nice. Nice is not what we want. I like you, you're a good person, but this is not the time for nice. We got our power, we got attention for the first time in that process by raising our voices, getting angry and leaving. And that is exactly where we are exactly where we want to be.
Wow.
And that is, I mean, that's where we are today. That's where we are today, writ large. And so it feels a lot more consequential now, a lot more important. I worry a lot about the question of, is our process a nice, respectful table full of people? Is that simply promoting the status quo, which is completely unacceptable as it is and needs to be changed? Can we change it by sitting at a table and being nice to each other? I'm not sure. I'm not sure we can. I love what I do. I'm not going to stop doing it. I think there's still a place for it, for sure. But it is not, that place is not everywhere. It is not. And there are cases that I would think a lot about taking. I mean, if a federal agency came to me, because they're, you know, often the ones that want peace. It's like, oh, the community's mad, do something, Lucy. I'm going to think to myself, community's mad, go for it. Yeah. And, you know, maybe I'm not going to take that case. Maybe I'm going to talk to EPA about what they're looking at and how they need to respond. I don't know, but it is definitely upfront in my thinking when I'm looking at issues that I'm invited to step into or that I might want to step into. I'm very much thinking about that. And I think it's really important for us all.
Well, they say if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But I think you're right. There are times for conflict resolution. There's time for conflict exacerbation. And I think recognizing that is important. Justice Alook, I saw you unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Not just now.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure I made you space. Yeah. So actually, Lucy, I know we're at the end of our time. I was wondering if I could get you to read one more thing kind of to wrap us up.
Sure.
Which is at the very end on page 110, the last paragraph. Could you read the first two sentences of that last paragraph? To be in the middle. Do you see that?
To be in the middle is an honor for me. I always feel grateful that this diverse bunch of disputants has allowed me to stand there, trusting that I will manage the difficulties that lie ahead fairly and with sensitivity. I love the moments when I can diffuse a dangerous moment, identify a roadblock, bring warring voices together, offer lightness or insight when needed most.
Well, I think that's a great way for us to resolve it. And you say at the end, you know, this is the role that has given me so much to think about these past 35 years. And I just want to say, you know, it's very rare in the field. I'm not going to be arrogant enough to think that I can speak for the field, but I will say thank you for all of the great work that you've done, Lucy, and the model that you've set for what our field stands for. I really feel like a lot of the lessons you've learned are lessons that the field still needs to learn. So I thank you so much, not only for your career, but this great chapter and spending an hour with us. This was really wonderful. So thank you very much.
Colin, it was my pleasure, really. And I appreciate everybody I'm looking at on the screen so much. I've been looking at you all and connecting as I've been talking, and am very grateful to have a relationship with each of you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So if everyone could join me in just giving kind of a round of virtual Zoom applause for Lucy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And we did record this session, so I will download it and share it with Lucy, and we'll edit it, and then we'll make it more widely available for everybody after that. But Lucy, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending, and be well and take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Colin.